Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for everybody to come out tonight. It's really humbling to see everybody come to hear this talk, which I think is the most exciting subject in the world. But I'm not biased. So, when we look at our world, if we look at our world from space, it's called the blue planet, and it looks like it's made up of a lot of water and continents. But actually, if you could look at this world in a bit more focus and you look at it more closely, our world should look like this. Because we actually live in a microbial world. And nothing would exist on Earth if we didn't have our microbes present. So if we talk about microbes, we have to think about every single ecosystem on our planet is full of microbes. Coming from the most dense, rich, moist rainforest to even areas that look to be very hostile environments. These are also full of microbes. Microbes have found a way to live on every part of our planet. Now, we would be pretty naive to think that we were any different. And in fact, microbes, all of you, also me, we are absolutely covered in microbes. So if you think about your body, every single barrier or mucosal surface on your body is colonized and is home to microbes. So when you think about the barrier surface of your body, of course you think about the skin, you think about everything that is exposed to the outside, to our microbial world. So of course, the skin, your mouth, but you have to think about a lot of the organs in your body are also exposed to the outside. So your lungs, for example, is really, you breathe in, and so the inside of your lungs is actually exposed to the outside. So it is also colonized with microbes. And now what about your gastrointestinal tract, so your intestines? Actually, our intestines are like an open tube that run from your mouth to your anus. So that's actually part of the outside environment. We have really good barriers to separate that from the inside of our body, which is sterile, but your GI tract is heavily colonized with microbes. And what are these microbes? So most of the time, especially in the last several years, we've really been focusing on bacteria, because bacteria are really very important microbes that colonize you. And if we look at the human microbiome, you have probably 500 to 1,000 different bacterial species that live on your body. And if you go down even lower, so to the strain level, if you talk about bacteria, there's way more than that. So we really have been focusing a lot on bacteria. But the last couple years, we've really been realizing that it's not just bacteria that are very important for our bodies, it's also viruses. So you have viruses that are called commensal viruses. That means they're not pathogenic. It's not like the flu virus. They're not pathogens. They're viruses that actually live on you all the time. We also talk about yeast and fungi. So we all have yeast and fungi colonizing in our guts. And also these little guys, which look pretty funky, this is called a phage. This is a virus that infects bacteria. So even our microbiome has a microbiome. So it's a very complex system, and these bacteriophage, we're starting to realize, are incredibly important for shaping our microbiome. Now, how many of these microbes do we have? Sometimes science is really of big numbers, and it's, at least for me, I find it very hard to try to visualize what a really, really large number is. So if you look at the Milky Way, at our galaxy, this is our galaxy. This is taken by my nephew sitting on a beach in New Zealand. So this is just taken on an iPhone. So you can see all of these stars in our galaxy, in the Milky Way. And there are about 100 to 400 billion stars in our galaxy. So you can look at that and you can imagine that is a huge, huge number. Now, let's put that into context. What about our microbes? We have 10 times that number on every single one of us. We have about 40 trillion microbes that live on our bodies. Now let's put that again into perspective. What about the cells in our body? You have about 30 trillion human cells in your body. That includes red blood cells that don't even have a nucleus. So you have actually about 55% of all the cells in your body are not even human. So, not sure we should call ourselves human or if we should call ourselves a superorganism. So if we look at that, actually, more than half, about 55% of the cells in your body are microbial. They're not even human. So again, we would be pretty naive to think that these microbes just are kind of passengers on our body and that they don't have any impact on our health. And because that's absolutely not the case. So that's the number of cells. What about the genetic information that these microbes carry? So if we look at the DNA, or the number of genes. So, I think we all know a gene is the coding material that encodes for proteins in our body. If we look at the DNA of people, so each and every one of us in this room, we have about 23,000 genes. And that's what controls all of the proteins and all of the things that control us, makes us who we are. What do you think about microbes? Microbes have about 3 million microbial genes. That's like 50 to 1. You have way more genetic information encoded in your microbes than you do in your own. So this is incredibly important because it means that it provides a lot of capacity of these microbes to do different things. And microbes are incredibly adaptable. And because they produce and proliferate really fast, they can evolve much, much faster than we are. So we have to think of our microbiome as a constantly changing entity in our world. And that's important when we think about our microbial health. Okay, so I talked about microbes that live on all different parts of the body. The biggest place that microbes play a role is in your gut. So 75% of all of the bacteria that live in your body are found in your gastrointestinal tract, and most of those are in your large intestine, so in your colon. And you have to think about, when you look at your body and you think about the microbes that live there. So your body isn't just one culture vat. Your body is a whole range of different ecosystems. You could compare it to the rainforest, or you can compare it to that volcano. So if we look at the different areas, the bacteria or the microbes that live there are dictated by that environment. So I live in Calgary. I don't know if anybody's been to Calgary. It's really dry. It's arid. So my skin, to tell you, it's like a desert. So the microbes that live in my skin are going to be completely different than the microbes that live in my mouth, because it's a different environment. It's a different humidity, different moisture, different pH, and those microbes are going to get different kinds of food. So the environment dictates what's going to be there. So you have a skin microbiome. You have an oral microbiome. You have a gut microbiome. Now, if you think about the gut is very different from running from the upper GI tract to the distal GI tract. So you have, as you move down the gastrointestinal tract, as you go from the stomach to the small intestine to the large intestine, the load of bacteria increases as you move down your gut. And that's very, very important for us, because your small intestine is where you have to absorb the nutrients from your food. You have to think about form and function. You have to have, you digest your food and you absorb your nutrients in your small intestine. So you don't want to have, a huge bacterial burden in the small intestine, because it's going to compete with your food there. And then you will have to have very strong barriers to stop that from penetrating inside your body. So your body has ways to control the load. So the composition of the type of bacteria that can live there is different to other parts, different to in the stomach, which is very acidic. But you have microbes there, but you have a lower load. Now, as you move down the gastrointestinal tract, the load increases drastically. So you have like 10 to the 14 bacteria in your large intestine, and the function of that is very different. Your colon is not really there to absorb nutrients, it's there to reabsorb water. And that's where the bacteria are the powerhouse for producing small molecules and metabolites that influence you. And that's where the bacteria start to digest the food that you couldn't digest. So let's talk a little bit about the function of the microbiome. So mostly here I'm talking about the gut microbiome. So my research program, not exclusively, but almost exclusively looks at the gut. So the one thing that your gut microbes do is they protect you from infection. So that whole area, so all your mucosal surfaces is the place that's exposed to the environment, and that's where pathogens or bad bacteria or viruses are going to come into contact with you. If you have a good, healthy microbiome that's already living there, it's going to protect you from those pathogens coming in. It's already there. It's taken up all the real estate. There's no space left for anybody to move in. And it actively fights it. It doesn't want intruders coming into its nice environment. So that's very important. That's colonization resistance. It also extracts energy from your food. So we eat a lot of complex carbohydrates that our body is not able to digest themselves. So what we do is we let that go down to our large intestine, and then we let our microbes digest it for us. So it helps us to extract this energy, and that's very, very important for making particular molecules for us. So your large intestine is like a little fermenter. Your bacteria are metabolizing this fiber. Your body is not able to produce all of the essential vitamins that you need to survive. Your bacteria in your gut, they do some of that for you. So vitamin K, which is very important for blood clotting, you can't make for yourself. You need your gut microbiota to make that for you, and then you absorb it. So we have to think they're our friends, and we need to nurture them. Your gut microbiota is very important for regulating your metabolism. It helps to regulate blood glucose levels. It helps to regulate your metabolic rate. And I'm an immunologist, and for me, one of the most exciting aspects of the microbiome is understanding that your microbes regulate your immune system. And this is very, very important in early life, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. So your microbes produce molecules that is critical for the education of your immune system. It helps to develop the immune system in the right way, and it sets the threshold or the tone of the immune system so that it helps to tell the immune system when it should be activated and when it should be turned off. Now, if you think about that, you have to think about your immunity. What do you need your immune system for? You need it to keep you healthy and protect you from pathogens. You need to be sure it's regulated so that you don't get autoimmune diseases, because autoimmune diseases are when your immune system starts to react against your proteins, self-antigens. You need a good immune system to respond to vaccination. You need a good immune system to fight off different diseases, different therapies. So that's a very critical aspect of what your microbiome helps you to do. So sort of if you just take a very simplistic view of the immune system, the idea is that if you have a rich and balanced microbial community or microbiome, then that's going to help to regulate so that you have a normal immune system that has the proper regulation. If you have a poor and unbalanced bacterial or microbial community, then this can help to drive immune pathologies. And that can be linked to things like autoimmunity, allergic diseases, metabolic disorders, or other immune disorders. So we really want to strive to have a healthy and good balanced immune system. So where do we get our when do we get a microbiome? So we believe that a newborn baby, as it's in development in utero, is in a sterile environment. So this is a little bit controversial right now in the field because there are some studies that have come out to show that there is a microbiome in the placenta and also in the utero. But I think the feeling is, although we can detect some microbes there, it's not a bona fide colonization. There may be some passengers that get through. But so generally, it's the baby, as it's developing, is in a sterile environment. And then what happens is that when the baby is born, during the birthing process, when the membranes rupture, that newborn baby is exposed to our microbial world. And that initiates a sequence of events that you can no longer stop and turn back. That initiates the dynamic colonization of that newborn baby. And that baby should be getting its microbes from its mom. And so the evolution, we've co-evolved with our microbes, so evolution has made it so that the mother, her microbiome changes during the third trimester of pregnancy to be sure that those microbes that that baby needs to be the first seed microbes, they're there in a higher quantity so that baby should get them. So, and we believe that a newborn baby's microbiome will develop over the first 3 years of life. It's a very dynamic event that's heavily influenced by the environment. The immune system of a newborn baby is also very immature at birth. And then you have this crosstalk between this developing microbiome and this developing immune system. And that's the most time we think that the critical events are happening during these first 3 years of life. After that time point, each and every one of us has a unique microbiome, but it starts to stabilize after about 3 years of life. You can perturb it, but generally it's going to be fairly stable. Oops. So this is basically sort of a slide to show you that during those first 3 years of life, that's the time when that microbiome that's still developing and progressing is the most important time where it is influenced by environmental factors. And that's things like from the mom, so what kind of gut microbiota the mom has. Even the mom's oral health can have an impact on that baby. But then after birth, so actually even during birth, so if you think about a baby that gets born via cesarean section versus a baby born by a vaginal birth, the first microbes that baby is exposed to will differ. A baby that is born by a vaginal birth is exposed to the vaginal and gut microbes. A baby born by a cesarean section, the first microbes it sees is microbes from the skin or microbes from the operating theater. And there was a really excellent study that was just published a few months ago with, I think it was 14,000 babies born in the UK, and they looked at cesarean section. And what they found was something pretty scary, was that cesarean section babies are getting colonized at those first few days of life with hospital-acquired antimicrobial resistant bacteria. And that's really not what you want to give a newborn baby from the beginning of life. The good thing is, now that we're aware of that, then we can start to think about how we can make sure that baby gets seeded properly in early life. Okay, then after birth, the diet is probably the biggest way you're going to influence a baby. So whether the baby is formula fed or breastfed, the age it gets solid food, what kinds of solid food, but also the interactions with the mother, and also whether the baby gets antibiotics. Now, antibiotics are a lifesaver. There's absolutely no question how important they have been in our Western cultures. Since World War II, they really revolutionized the ability for us to do surgeries, so people don't die from having a surgical intervention. The problem with antibiotics now has been that since World War II, when they realized how beneficial they were and how great they were helping us, this sort of idea came up that they're so good they can do no harm. And that's not true. Because if you think of all those microbes that live on you, antibiotics are not a precision therapy. They're not targeting just that pathogen that you're trying to get rid of. They're like an atomic bomb to your commensal non-pathogenic microbes. And so this is really critical in this window of time early in life. And then there's lots of different things that can influence it. But those are probably the biggest ones. Antibiotic use and diet of the baby. Now, why is diet so very important at this early time? I think the human body is absolutely amazing. So a mother gives birth to her baby, and then if the baby is breastfed, then the mother is giving the nutrients to the baby. Now, the breast milk is not just providing nutrients to the baby. Breast milk is full of human milk oligosaccharides. And what's super interesting is the baby can't not digest these. This is not to feed the baby. These HMOs in breast milk are to feed the microbiome. And they're very important to nurture this microbiome that actually gives the signals to mature the immune system in the proper way. The biology is amazing. Through coevolution, we've figured this all out. So we shouldn't kind of screw it up. We should think about it because, biology is pretty smart. So we have the baby that's developing in utero, where we think is a sterile environment. And then you have these first 1,000 days of life during the neonatal period and end stage. Microbiome changes again at puberty due to hormonal influences. And then it's pretty stable over adulthood unless you really batter it. And then, amazingly, in elderly age, seems like around the age of 65, your microbiome starts to change again. But we don't really know why. So there's lots of studies to try to figure out if it's because of your diet, or less activity, or hormones, or something in your body. So that's a big area of study. Now, we did a study a couple years ago that was published, just a couple years ago. We asked the question, well, if the microbiome is so important, is it really only that the microbiome is important from the day of birth on? Is that really like the time that the microbial influence starts because the baby's in a sterile environment in utero? So we asked the question, well, could it be that the mom's microbiome, even before birth, could have an influence on this baby? And what we found was, yes, the mom's microbiome, even though it doesn't go in utero or doesn't cross the placenta, because those microbes ferment fiber in your gut, their fermentation or metabolic products are very small molecules called metabolites. They can pass into your body. And what happens during pregnancy is the mom's immune system, her antibodies, capture these small molecules. And because they're specific antibodies, we have a way to transfer those antibodies across the placenta and into the milk to bring it to the baby. And what we found was the functional shaping of that baby's immune system starts even before birth in utero by exposure to products from the mom's microbiome. So we have to think about the maternal microbiome even during pregnancy, and some people think even before conception. And now there's studies showing that the dad's microbiome also is important through specific genetic effects. So this study that we published really showed that the mom's antibodies capture these microbial products, take it into the baby through the breast milk or in utero, and then it starts shaping this entire immune system so that when that baby is born, it's already ready to face the onslaught of colonization without having a massive inflammatory reaction. It's already saying it's prepared to receive it, that it's going to be a normal process. So it's a very important event. So that's basically summarized here. You have microbes in the breast milk itself, in the environment, and then you get this signals through the placenta that happen in utero. You get then this vertical transmission of the microbes during the birthing process. and then you have this early life seeding. Why is that important? It's important because two things. Your immune system is developing during this time, and it needs this crosstalk. And that those first microbes that come into an empty, germ-free gut of the baby, they set the stage to allow the next ones to come in. So there's successive waves of colonization. So if the wrong microbes get in there first, they change the environment a little bit. So maybe they proliferate too much, take the wrong niche, prevent some of the other good ones to come in. So it's a very dynamic event. So this first seed microbiome is very important. Now, I'm talking really a lot about the immune system and like in the gut, but what's amazing about the microbiome, because they make these small molecules, is that the influence of the microbiome is not just locally where the microbiome is. It has effects on very distal sites in your body, even though they are not colonized with bacteria themselves. So your gut microbiome has an impact on your liver, your heart, your pancreas, your lungs, your adipose tissue, and your brain. And there are many things throughout life, environmental factors, that can have an impact on your microbiome. So it's not just early in life. So antibiotics or other drugs that have antimicrobial activity are the two best ways you want to change your microbiome. So take antibiotics or eat bad, or change your diet. Your microbes eat what you eat. So you want to feed to nurture a good microbiome. And we know one thing that's happened in westernized countries is that we've been changing our microbiome because we've been changing our diet pretty drastically over the last 60 years. Highly processed foods really changes the microbes that are able to live there. Even things like stress, insufficient sleep, they can all have an impact on your microbiome. So the idea right now is that we believe that since the last 60 years, so maybe since the end of World War II, our environment that we live in has changed really drastically. We've become obsessed with hygiene. And we've really changed our diet, and we've over-abused antibiotics. And the idea is that we have now developed a westernized microbiome. And that westernized microbiome, we believe, is less diverse. There's less types of bacteria that should be there. And it's become much more, because it's less diverse, it's become much more vulnerable to insults from the environment. So all of the things we did has changed our microbiome. And we think that it's not the only thing, but it's one of the contributing factors to the massive increase in chronic disease we see in westernized countries. Now, the big question is, can we revert that? Can we as a society say, well, we need to get rid of this vulnerable industrialized microbiome and go back to one that is nurtured by a better diet and change in our lifestyle. This is showing you, it's a bit of a scientific plot, but it's kind of showing you here the microbiome up here of a variety of different countries. And it's showing you, this is a diversity plot. And if you're over here, you have a traditional diet. So if you look here, this is the Yanomami tribe in Venezuela. Venezuela, that was an untouched tribe until a few years ago. They have the absolute most diverse microbiome. Compared to Canada, is way over here. This is our industrialized microbiome. And you see these are different types of bacteria. Industrialized nations like Canada, we have a huge predominance of this Varomicrobia, whereas these guys over here, they have a lot of these different ones. And now we're trying to study what does that really mean, and how can we utilize that information. This is just looking at if you have a balanced physiology, it should look like this. Microbiota gives all kinds of signals to drug metabolism, motility, vitamins, everything. But now if we look at what we have this also disrupted balance of all of our physiological functions. Now, these are all of the chronic diseases that we know are associated with an altered microbiome. So every single one of these diseases, if you look at the microbiome of the patients or people with this disease, they do not look like a healthy individual. And this is what we call a dysbiosis. Dysbiosis just means you have an altered microbiome. But generally, what it means is that they have a reduced diversity. So they have less types of bacteria in their guts than a healthy individual would. And if we look at westernized countries, we have an epidemic of chronic diseases. It's incredible, going from the 1960s to the increase in the proportion of diseases like autoimmune diseases like type 1 diabetes, allergic diseases, inflammatory diseases like IBD, lupus, MS, which are autoimmune diseases, also now anaphylaxis. These are all immune-mediated diseases. So for some reason, in 50 years, our immune systems have gone crazy. Now, that's not genetic. We don't evolve so quickly. That's environmental. So something in our environment has been changing and is helping to drive these kind of diseases. And we believe that changes in the microbiome is one aspect of those changes. But it's not just limited to immune-mediated diseases. It's also obesity, metabolic disorders like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, neurodevelopmental, and neurodegenerative diseases. I'm not saying that the microbiome is causing all of these, but I'm saying that we see a change in the microbiome over that time and an increase in these diseases. So we have a very strong association. And now we need to look to see, is that just an association, or is there really something to that? In Canada, we have some shocking statistics. 3 out of 5 Canadians older than 20 have a chronic disease. I mean, that's shocking. If we keep going along this way, we're going to have, by 2039, 80% of our population is going to have a chronic disease. 4 out of 5 Canadians are at risk for a chronic disease. Now, that's a challenge to researchers. It's a challenge to us to try to figure out what's the association between an altered microbiome and disease. Could it be causal? Could we have an altered microbiome and that has caused disease? Could it be simply the opposite? We get a disease and that disease has helped to change our microbiome. Or is it both? And it's probably a bit of both. We know that if you have an inflammatory disease in your gut, if you have IBD, that inflammation changes the environment, and changes in environment will change your microbiome. So it's probably really both. Now that's the tricky part. We need to tease out what's cause and what's consequence, and how can we make rationally designed therapies that bring in this information. So what we need to do in science is to try to really move microbiome research out of this association and try to look for mechanism, underlying mechanistic pathways that we can exploit to improve health or treat disease. So we hope that we'll be informed by situations in humans, then we want to do all kinds of research on that, and then take that information back to humans and hopefully better our health and treat disease. In Calgary, we've developed the International Microbiome Center to be a one-stop shop for microbiome researchers, to allow them to be able to do all the kinds of research we need to do to understand how the microbiome influences disease. So we have notobiology, genomics, metabolomics, proteomics, bioinformatics. There's a lot of data here. We need really good people with computers to figure it out, and that's not me. We have imaging, mass cytometry, all kinds of incredible technology that we can sort of try to tease this apart. And that's some pictures of it. Now, how are we going to use this information? How can we change our microbiome or use it as a therapy? The good thing about the microbiome is not like, so you have your genes. I have my genes. We can't change them. You're born with them, that's what you get. But your microbiome is a modifiable factor. So we know that because, we modify it all the time by the way, our diet and different things. And that means there's a huge promise. We can harness the power of the microbiome to use it for therapies to help to treat disease. What are microbial therapeutics? I'm sure all of you have heard of probiotics. Probiotics are just giving a live microbe, bacteria of some sort, and giving that to you in the hopes that that's going to give you some benefit. Now, I'm just going to tell you that, remember at the very beginning I said one of the functions of the microbiome is to protect you from pathogens and infection, called colonization resistance. It doesn't care who's trying to come in and live in its neighborhood. If you give a probiotic and your gut's already full of, it's not going to be able to take up residence there. It's full. Real estate's full. So you're just going to eat it, and it's just going to come out the other end. So there's a lot of marketing for probiotics that is really marketing. And that's because it's a food product. It's not regulated by medicine. And that's not to say probiotics cannot be good. And there are instances where it's very important, like perhaps maybe if you've taken antibiotics and you wiped out a lot of your microbes, maybe that would be a good time to replenish it with good bacteria. I don't know. I mean, that's just speculation. But I think that probiotics have a huge promise. If we make rationally designed, scientifically proven probiotics, and we know how to deliver them at the right time in the right place, then I think they have incredible promise. And what about prebiotics? Prebiotics is just food. Prebiotics is giving food so that your microbiome can eat it. Fiber is a prebiotic. And so, as I said, one super good way to change your microbiome and have a healthy microbiome is to feed it the right things. Now, natural prebiotics are food. You don't need to buy stuff off the shelf to have prebiotic. Some super good prebiotics are asparagus, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, Jerusalem artichokes. These are super good prebiotics to help to drive a good microbiome. The other one, maybe all of you have heard about, is fecal microbial transplantation. That's kind of like probiotics. That's like taking the feces from somebody who's healthy and giving it to somebody who's not. And with the hope that we can just switch that person. Now, it sounds horrible, but it is incredibly effective in some situations. So there's a bacterial infection called Clostridium difficile. Clostridium difficile is an antibiotic-resistant type of bacteria, and it's nasty. It produces toxins that are really bad for your health, and it can be hospital-acquired. It's really very bad for elderly people, immunocompromised people, and that it gets in there, and then the gut that should be all nice and colorful with lots of different microbes, it really takes it over. And it can have a high morbidity and a mortality, so it can kill people. So a few years ago now, people said, well, why don't we do fecal microbial transplantation? Let's take this nice poo from this healthy person and put it in here. Can we reset this? Incredibly, yes. It's more than 95% curative. There's no antibiotic treatment that is curative, and that's incredibly effective. Now, that's a huge promise. So now, in research, people are trying fecal microbial transplantations in every kind of disease that is associated with an altered microbiome. That includes gut inflammation, inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel syndrome. But it's not just gut diseases that it's being used for, it's systemic diseases. Obesity, type 2 diabetes, type 1 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, cancer, you name it, there are trials out there to find this. And also brain disorders, autism, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, MS, there are fecal microbial trials going on for this. And they have a variety of efficacy. And one really interesting thing is the IBD has been going on for quite some time, and it's very mixed results. So many times it had no efficacy. But sometimes it had a huge benefit. And they found actually in one study that they had a super donor. They had one person who had an amazing microbiome, and that helped these people. So they're really trying to study what's in this super donor. The bad thing is, I just heard that this super donor got an infection, took antibiotics, and he's no longer a super donor. So pretty sad, but what we need to do is go away from a mixture of somebody's poo and figure out how is that beneficial? What microbes are in there doing all of the good work? Let's do rationally designed transplant microbial therapies where we give the exact bacteria. Now, the dangerous thing about fecal microbial transplantation is also, if you think, all of the benefit your microbiome can do, of course, there's a flip side. If it has that much power, it can do a lot of harm. So you don't want to just take this and think, like antibiotics, it can do no harm because it's so good. That's absolutely not true. Just earlier this year in the US, a person died with fecal microbial transplantation. The FDA stopped all FMTs because they said we need to have better screening of the donor because this was an immunocompromised patient, got a pathogen and died from the pathogen. So it's incredibly exciting, but we have to be tempered and we need to do the research to really figure out what's going on. So now I'm going to talk, I have no idea what the time is. Sometimes I just blah, 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 so. Okay. So I'm going to give you some examples where microbial therapy is already in action and showing amazing promise. And the first one I want to talk about is cancer immunotherapy. Every single one of us in this room at some point will have a cancerous cell in your body. Happens all the time. But your immune system is there, it recognizes it and gets rid of it immediately. So I don't know if any of you have ever had little white spots like in your skin where the melanin's been destroyed. That's because your immune system thought there was something wrong with that cell and killed the cell that was producing the melanin. So your immune system's always surveilling your body. Now with cancer, some tumors go into stealth mode, and they utilize the immune system and to shut it off. So normally the immune system is there to fight pathogens. So if you get a virus, the immune system gets turned on, it runs around, it kills all the virus-infected cells or neutralizes the virus, gets rid of it, then it knows to turn itself off, so it doesn't constantly be activated. So it has certain molecules on the surface of cells that tell itself to turn itself off. Some tumors produce the match to that molecule. So this is an example here. Here's one of your immune cells, a T cell. Here's a cancer cell. The cancer cell starts to express this molecule that binds to its receptor on a T cell, and that's telling that T cell, whoa, I'm a good guy, don't kill me, put your brakes on, turn it off. And so your immune system starts to ignore the cancer. Now, last year, 2 scientists won the Nobel Prize for discovering that they can block this interaction with immunotherapy. They block this interaction, they release the brake from the immune system, turn the immune system back on, now it can kill the cancer. Now, this immunotherapy has been incredibly powerful. Sometimes up to 60% of patients are cured with this immunotherapy. So far, it's been used in some forms of lung cancer, kidney cancer, but it doesn't work in everybody. And even if you have a cancer that seems to be sensitive to this type of therapy, sometimes it only works in 40% of those patients. So why is that? Something super interesting is we found out that your microbiome might be dictating whether that immunotherapy is going to work in you or not. And that's because your microbiome controls your immune system. So we found out, so not me, this isn't my study, that this immunotherapy doesn't work at all in a germ-free mouse. If a germ-free mouse is a mouse that we can grow or develop, house, completely germ-free, has no microbes on it whatsoever, lives in a bubble. If you give this immunotherapy, it doesn't work. Nothing happens. You need a microbiome to do it. And then a couple other studies came out last year that found that if you take the microbiome from a patient with cancer that was not responding to this immunotherapy, you transfer that into a germ-free mouse, and then you give it cancer and immunotherapy. then immunotherapy doesn't work either. But if you take the microbiome from a patient who was responding to that therapy, put that into a germ-free mouse, that mouse will also respond. So it means that the microbiome can carry incredibly important information, and it could dictate whether things like immunotherapy is going to work for you. So my lab is really studying this, and we're really excited because we've identified 3 bacterial species and 1 metabolite that might be very key for this interaction. What about metabolic disorders? We know, again, there's association. So when you have obesity, you have an altered microbiome compared to a lean person. So lean people have more diversity, obese people have less diversity. So same situation. They took twins, so genetically identical individuals. One was obese, one was lean, transferred the microbiota to a germ-free recipient animal, fed them the same healthy, low-fat, high-fiber diet. This mouse stayed lean and this mouse got fat. It tells you that the microbiome can regulate the metabolic rate. It doesn't mean that your microbiome is causing obesity. What it means is that it can be transmissible or transferable with your microbiome. So if your lifestyle, the diet that you eat, will affect your microbes, and they're going to change and develop a certain composition and a certain metabolic way that will help to perpetuate your microbiome, your obesity, because it impacts on your metabolic rate. And what about your brain? So people have known for a long time there's a gut-brain connection. But now we're really trying to figure out what does that really mean, a gut-brain connection. So it was astonishing to people for a long time that bugs in your gut, they're not really inside your body. There's a big barrier there and a lot of mechanisms to keep them out of the inside sterile of your body. How are they going to influence your brain, which is very distal, has a nice, strong blood-brain barrier, so you don't get lots of bad things going into your brain. But now we know that your microbiome can have a big impact on that. They've been doing fecal microbial transplantations in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. There's one study done in autism spectrum disorder. Some of them show efficacy. Some of them have not. But it's not that far-fetched. So your microbiome, I think I showed. Your microbiome, first of all, makes neurotransmitters. So your microbiome can make serotonin and GABA. It can affect your gut, enteric nervous system, but it can also travel across the blood-brain barrier into your brain. Your microbiome can also make things like tryptophan. Tryptophan is downstream of serotonin. So you need to make tryptophan to get serotonin, and that can help to drive this pathway. Your gut microbiome can make hormones. That can have an impact on your brain, on your pituitary. And there's crosstalk. Your brain can also make things that will affect your immune system. Your immune system can affect your microbiome. So this is an area that is incredibly active area of research, and people now are looking at it in depression, all kinds of different brain diseases. Not that the microbiome caused those diseases, but changes in the microbiome may help to perpetuate it. So maybe we can change the microbiome to make different molecules, and maybe that will help us to treat or at least decrease some of the symptoms of these diseases. Other studies that we're doing in Calgary, we have this Bugs to Drugs initiative to see what metabolites or molecules the microbiome can make that we could utilize. There is a study on Parkinson's disease, depression, diet. We have a researcher that's really looking at diet and how diet can impact on your microbiome. I have a project on type 1 diabetes. We have projects on early life microbiome. And can it play a role in premature birth? Can we make sure that every new baby born is born with a good starting bacteria? So there's really a lot of research to do, and I'm happy to say we're very excited about doing this research, and I think there is a lot of hype about the microbiome because it's a very exciting field, but I think we also have to be very conscious that we need to understand the mechanisms and how we can utilize this in a controlled fashion. So don't all run home and do an FMT. You can look it up on the internet, and they have like self-kits what to do it. But if you're going to do it, find somebody that you really think is going to have a good microbiome. No, don't do it. Don't do it. And so there's going to be hype, and there's going to be people out there that are going to try to take advantage of it. So anybody selling snake oil, anything too good to be true is probably too good to be true. So I think we really need to do a lot more research. But I really think that this is an exciting area, and I think we're going to be able to harness the power of our microbiome to treat disease and keep us healthy. Thank you for your attention.